What we saw was horrible, completely and utterly messed up. This man's life matters. He was a human being and his life mattered. I believe what I saw, and what I saw was wrong at every level. Being black in America should not be a death sentence. For 5 minutes, we watched as a white officer pressed his knee into the neck of a black man. When you hear someone calling for help, you are supposed to help. This officer failed in the most basic human sense, and it serves as a clear reminder of just how far we have to go. To the black community, to the family, I'm so sorry.
That was the mayor of Minneapolis, Minnesota, Jacob Frey, speaking on what we've been talking about all morning, the death of George Floyd, inflicted by 2 police officers of that town, or 1 police officer while others watched. And, you know, we spent the whole morning allowing people just to vent and talk about their frustrations and what's next and what do we have to do to make all of this senseless killings, especially at the hands of police officers, end. How do we make it end? How do we make it stop? So I wanted to reach out to a good friend of ours who's a citizen of Sway in the Morning, and this is a guy who walks the streets, and he's the mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota, right next to sister city, if you will, of Minneapolis, if I could be so bold. The one and only Melvin W. Carter III is on the line with us. Mayor Carter, how are you doing?
Wow.
You know, I'm hanging in there. It's a difficult time in our community, but I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. We also have Mike Muse here, who is who does a lot of our political coverage. Mike, are you there?
Yeah, I am. How you doing today, Mr. Mayor?
I'm doing all right. We're pushing forward, sir.
And because it's St. Paul and Minneapolis are 2 different towns, it's still the same impact. It's still the same effect. It's really the same community, if you ask me. And we were talking about how every year around this time we are in that area. You come on the show, you greet the citizens of that area, and we talk politics, we talk culture, the whole nine, for usually because of Soundset. What is the mood right now in that area? What are you seeing? What are people saying?
You know, it's sadness and it's anger. You know, we see this video that's just so hurtful, that's so offensive, that's so offensive to the human soul. When you see a sworn peace officer casually aggressive in that way towards George Floyd, holding his knee on his neck for so long until he literally squeezes all of the life out of him. You know, when his job is, you know, we all know that the basic job of a police officer is to help people who are hurting. Not only did that one officer do that, but you have 3 other officers in there who are either holding him down or standing guard while it happens. And we know that it speaks to a normalized and accepted culture that cannot continue moving forward. I think people are really hurt by it. We're in mourning for George Floyd. We're insulted and offended, and there's a whole lot of anger in community right now.
That particular community has had its share of issues with police and citizen conflict. Had you seen it getting better in recent years, or is this is the norm over there?
You know, I think the relationship between police and community is the same as everything. You know, Minneapolis, just like us, we spend an enormous amount of time and energy building trust and engaging community leaders and, you know, figuring out, you know, in St. Paul, we've completely changed our use of force policies and, you know, we've done a whole lot of things. But trust that takes a lifetime to be built can be broken in an instant. And so, you know, that wasn't the St. Paul Police Department. It wasn't a whole lot of Minneapolis police officers, and it wasn't a whole bunch of folks. But it's a reflection in people's eyes on every officer that we send out into our streets. New York and, you know, any other major city police department, the people in those communities see that as a reflection of that. And so, you know, I think we all have to know that our work to build trust is just never complete, especially when we continue to have images like this that are burned into our psyche.
This is Mayor Melvin Carter of St. Paul, Minnesota. Mike Muse, go for it.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, earlier this morning we've been talking to our citizens and our fantastic listeners, and, you know, there's this conversation, and you're bringing it back into the conversation to the narrative of the good cop. I'm curious, what What was the conversation like for you yesterday between you and your police chief, your police commissioner? What were some of the things that you two talked about? I'm sure you two had to have a conversation about this.
We absolutely had a conversation about it, and my chief was every bit as disturbed by it and disgusted by that video as I was. I know he's had conversations with his leadership team and his officers about that as well. It's just heartbreaking to see when those things occur. This is something that, for me, it points not just to training, because people always say you got to train. I don't think you can train somebody, not to put their knee on somebody's neck and squeeze the life out of them. That's a hiring problem. That's somebody who never should have been a police officer in the first place, who clearly doesn't seem to have the temperament or the character to be able to protect and serve in the community that he was serving in the way that we needed him to. And so to me, this invokes everything from how we hire police officers, who we hire and where we hire them from, because it's critical that we have officers who live in and know and love the communities that they patrol. It does invoke how we train them, but it also invokes how we hold them accountable. And for me, until we get to the place where we can have some level of confidence that we have a legal system that'll hold officers accountable when something this egregious, something this blatant, this violent happens, then the only logical answer is we'll continue to be having to fight this battle.
We know there's this narrative of the blue wall. And I was encouraging, and we were encouraging the good cops to stand up and say something. That's the only way that we can really put forward an equitable narrative of there's equal, there's more good cops than bad cops. But until we hear more from the good cops, the general majorative narrative is there's over-assumption of there are bad cops. With the understanding there is a blue wall, with the understanding that police officers are a fraternity, right? Are there safe spaces and ways that if officers were the good ones to step up and can maybe go against their union, right, or maybe step up and really begin to advocate for the good cops, that they can be protected? Like, how do we create, or how do you, as an elected official, how does you, who oversee the police chief and commissioner, really begin to make sure there is safe space for those officers who do want to speak up against their fellow brethren?
Yeah, I'm hoping we're moving in that direction. My father's a retired St. Paul police officer. He was an officer for 30 years. So I literally grew up praying for the safety of our officers. I grew up at fight night and Super Bowl parties surrounded by officers. And then I tell folks I turned 16 and started driving and met a whole bunch of other officers in our city as well. And so we do have this kind of really strong dichotomy between these kind of officers who, and what I'll tell you is one thing that's, I think, a relatively new phenomenon is, officers who don't live in community. You watch, Barney Fife, or you watch these old TV shows, and the police officers lived right in that community. They knew what grade those kids were in. They knew, what was right in community. They knew the shop owners and the pastors and things like that. And I think it's a relatively new phenomenon that we have police officers who might live very, very far away, patrolling communities that they don't necessarily, that they only know from through a lens of law enforcement. And I think that's part of what creates some challenging paradoxes between the officers and just the lens through which they see the communities that they're supposed to be serving. And so I think there's an enormous set of things, empowering those officers, I think starts with making sure that we're hiring them different as we, do our psychological evaluations, as we do our kind of background checks to make sure that we have folks who know and understand and love community. I think it's about ensuring that we are focused on electing leaders who are going to help try to restore that social compact that has to exist, that's sort of been broken. Because when we see this video yesterday, I think connects one of the reasons that we're so angry about it is when we hire these officers to protect and serve us, and we see one literally squeezing the life out of somebody who looks like me and like you, it's just another reminder. It's another painful reminder that, makes many of us feel like we're not actually intended to be a part of the American largesse or the American dream that we always hear talked about from Washington, D.C.
Mayor Melvin Carter from St. Paul, Minnesota is on the line. I know your time is limited, Mayor. I just want to ask you two things. We talk about these officers, especially this one who squeezed the life out of George Floyd, and we know that their positions were terminated but people want to see more happen. We want to see them go. We want to see them go to trial. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
For a lot of onlookers, we don't want them to be fired and still receive retirement and benefits. You know what I mean?
Or go get a job as a police officer in a different jurisdiction.
Exactly. What happens next for them?
You know, that depends on a number of things. You know, I'm looking at our county attorney in Hennepin County. His name is Mike Freeman. I'm looking at him to skip the grand jury process and just bring charges. I'm looking at him to bring them relatively quickly. You know, a bunch of my friends, we were talking yesterday, you know, if you had me on video doing that, you know, somebody would figure out how to bring charges by the end of the day. And so, you know, I'm looking for them to bring charges quickly. I'm looking for them to build that case and to show that we value our lives, that we value black lives, that we value George Floyd's life enough to hold somebody accountable for it. I do appreciate, you know, Mayor Fry is a good friend in Minneapolis. And, you know, you played a piece of his statement. He issued a really strong statement, I think, yesterday, and made an even stronger statement by firing those officers within 24 hours. Again, not just the one who actually had his knee on George Floyd's neck, but the ones who stood around and did nothing to intervene while he did that as well. I think that's a strong statement. He's also in a difficult position because I'm also counting on him not to do or say anything right now that'll limit or jeopardize the city of Minneapolis or the Minneapolis Police Department's ability to hold those officers accountable. So he's got to be careful what he does and says at that point, which, you know, any mayor would tell you. And so, you know, I'm glad to see them have lost their jobs because that makes a strong statement. And now it's up to those folks in charge of our local justice system, starting with the county attorney, to bring strong charges and stand behind them.
And then finally, we have a lot of citizenship that have called in this morning. Many people from that area, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the surrounding area, from that entire region of the country. Venting, upset. Some folks are saying they're scared. A lot of people are angry. People have reached a boiling point. As a mayor in that area, what are you telling your community? What are you saying to the citizens right now at this time?
You know, I tell you, if you start talking, I've learned if you start talking to people after a crisis happens, you're too late. I ran for office in the first place about this. We created, you and I have discussed this before, we created our community first public safety framework, which centers around mental health support. It centers around helping people find stability. It centers around investing in the disinvested locations, and it centers around investing in a style of policing that focuses on building trust and relationships over that kind of headbanging kind of style of policing that we know is a part of our American history. And it also focuses our whole style of governance on engaging people in the governance process and bringing people into the governance process so they not only know what we're doing, but that they're stakeholders in it. You know, this is a part of everything, right? I have neighbors. We have 40% of our low-income workers in America got laid off, yet the stock market is rallying over the past couple of months, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic, yet we have folks who still can't afford medical treatment. And so all of those things just pile up to create a mountain of evidence to tell some of us that we're not meant to be a part of it. Whatever it is that we're building in this American experiment, we're not meant to be a part of it. So when we get upset at people for wanting to disrupt or wanting to protest, the thing is they don't see themselves as disrupting anything that they've ever been welcome to be a part of. And so until people are able to be a part of our economy, until people are able to see, you know, when the Dow Jones goes up, that means it's a little easier for me to pay my rent. When we're in a pandemic, that means, you know, we're all going to take care of each other, you know, medically speaking. We're seeing people lose their jobs. We're seeing people lose their homes. And we're hearing messages out of Washington, D.C. that there's no rush for another stimulus. There's no rush for additional assistance out of Washington, D.C. And all of those things just put salt right into the wound. And those things are going to make people angrier and angrier. Our goal is to engage people in the process to make sure that they know that this city belongs to them. It's literally theirs to invest in. It's theirs to build. It's theirs to govern. And we're going to do this together. And I think that's the only way.
I want to say, send my love, my support, and strength to you, Mayor Carter. Thank you for joining us this morning. And send the same, if you can, to Mayor Fry, if you get a chance to speak to your friend and to all those people in that surrounding area that's always received us like family. Anytime we brought the show into town, we are family. And so It's unfortunate this happened, but thank you for calling in. We might need to tap in with you later on in the week or even next week. We just want to stay connected. Okay, sir?
Without a doubt. I appreciate you. It's good talking to you again.
Always. Mayor Carter. Mike Muse, hold on the line. We're going to come back. It's Sway in the Morning. It's Shade 4 or 5.